Hello, everyone. This is Chapter 6 Attitudes and Boundaries for Counseling 4000. So let's go into the introduction. Typically, when we talk about attitudes, we're talking about optimistic, encouraging, you're innovative, which basically means that you're creative. Collaborative means that you work well with other people. There's also people who are messy and fraught with misunderstandings. So those are people who might get confused a lot. They might get confused about what is going on. There might be fear, and then there's also disappointment. The way you see clients and the way you relate to them may affect how things turn out in a relationship. So, part of this chapter is going to be asking you to look within yourself as well as looking outside. This chapter is about exploring attitudes that are necessary for a productive relationship. Consider boundaries from different perspectives, and then examining the importance of self determination. And self determination is basically being able to decide what you want to do with your life or with yourself, making your own decisions. The attitudes here, we're talking about feelings that you have about other people and situations. And that's what we'll be analyzing throughout this chapter. All right, understanding attitudes. Attitudes are extremely important. This is how you communicate your feelings to your clients and to establish rapport. Typically, we're expecting you to be positive and supportive. Lose a working relationship, feeling superior to your client, maybe feeling disdainful, or basically having lack of respect for other people. And that's what they're saying is how you would lose a working relationship. Good human service workers have learned about themselves, their fears, sensitivities, and errors in judgment. This is how you understand yourself. And I know that some of y'all are very young, which is great, and you are on your way to learning and finding out who you are as a person. And for some of you who are maybe a little bit older, maybe you have now kind of discovered most of who you are, right? Well, you're still in school, you're learning, which is fantastic. And I hope that I transmit a feeling that I kind of know who I am. I'm pretty comfortable with myself. And part of that is because I really do feel like I do understand myself. Do I sometimes get confused or frustrated or scared or anxious? Of course, for sure. But overall, I think that, when we're in class, I think you see who I am as a person. And I hope that you all are going to be able to do the same as well. When this happens, you're both able to feel understanding and warm towards yourself and then, of course, to others. So, RuPaul, which is a drag queen, always says, I think, I don't want to quote her now. If you can't love yourself, how are you going to love somebody else, right? So, definitely, for sure, learning to love yourself, and then that would hopefully let you also love other people as well. If you can forgive yourself for the mistakes you make and the struggles that you have had and see them as part of growing, you will realize that you're basically all right. Okay, not like right as in like you're always correct, but that you're doing pretty good. Okay, and again, no one is perfect. You will make mistakes. I make plenty of mistakes, and I get it. But don't let it drag you down, even though sometimes it does make you feel pretty crappy and stuff like that. But we hope that overall you can see the bigger picture, which is that you've learned from this moment. All right, problems and bad decisions happen to everyone. When you understand this, you are more likely to see others' personal struggles as productive of growth and not just failures. So we're hoping that you understand that, things happen, right? And so sometimes the people that you're working with, your clients, things have just happened to them. And they're trying to get through it, just like you tried to get through it when it happened to you. Be kind to yourself with your mistakes. Look at yourself objectively. So, don't go into denial and say, someone else's fault or, it didn't really happen. You do need to be realistic and grounded and pretty logical, I would say. Forgive yourself for errors in judgment, especially ones that teach you a lesson. So again, what did you learn from this horrible experience or embarrassing experience or whatever kind of experience that you're experiencing? Being human is to struggle with issues and transitional problems. Remember, transitional, when you hear that word, it's kind of like phase of life issues, right? And it could be Anything, again, typically when you hear the word transition, that's dealing with developmental, which is lifespan, right? So transitions could be puberty, it could also be the first date, getting married, having a child, getting fired. Those are the transitions that we're talking about. And as we go through this, we become stronger and we see new insight. Yeah, I hope that whenever you make a mistake, you learn from it. I really do. That you don't just brush it away and then, forget about it, but actually, like, learn from it. I learn from all my mistakes all the time, and I'm very grateful to have those mistakes, and I'm also embarrassed by them. But again, the bigger picture is that it will make me a better person. All right, basic helping attitudes. There are 3 basic helping attitudes to your work, which are warmth, genuineness, and empathy. And this is, of course, obviously, if you ever hear these terms, they're from Carl Rogers. All right, let's talk about warmth. That is defined as friendly, non-judgmental, and receptive. Receptive means like welcoming, okay? This makes a warm atmosphere, helps put your client at ease when they feel like, you are a warm person. So the client feels valued by you as a person. The client are worthy of being understood. Refrain from judging what clients say and the actions that they take. So don't also jump into conclusions about your clients. Refrain from it basically means like, don't do those things, right? A warm smile at a new client is a way to show warmth. Offer a person a chair, wanting to know why a person came to seek therapy. Those are ways that you're like welcoming that person in. And one of the things that we always want to know is, do you think that you have a warm smile? Okay. Practice with yourself in the mirror. Smile in front of your friends and your family and say, does this look like a warm smile to you? Right? Is it authentic to you, or are you trying really hard and it doesn't look authentic and real? You want to listen to what they tell you and what they have done and felt, what brought them to seek help. So we're talking about our clients again. So that means that we're listening. That's part of warmth. Warmth response might be something like, tell me more about that. This is an invitation to talk to you in a safe space. Whereas a colder response, or one that's not necessarily so warm, is it sounds like your decision wasn't a good one, right? It sounds a little judgmental, a little distant. Establishing that the client has something to offer, respecting your client's right to make their own decisions. So we're talking about self-determination before. This is what we're talking about here is your client is going to make some decisions on their own. You may facilitate better decisions than the ones that they might have made alone, but ultimately the decisions about their lives are their own, and you will respect that. So that comes with the question that you might have asked while listening to this so far is, what happens if your client just does not have the ability to think of ways to help themselves, right? That's where you come in, okay? You might drop hints to see if they pick them up and then kind of explore. You might also offer stories, metaphors, where then they go, oh, let me think about that. And then from there, then they might be able to explore all of that. We will learn how you can give the client some of your thoughts in ways that people can hear and receive ideas more easily. So again, having that warmth makes people feel safe so that they are welcoming of different ideas and actually taking into consideration and potentially adopting it. Some will choose to ignore you and make your own decisions, and you will still support the person if need be through these consequences. Sometimes what that is saying is that your client needs to learn, if they're insistent, let's say, on a specific thing, then let them try it out and see if they fail or not, right? If it is something where it's similar to an older habit, they might. But from there, we take that as a learning opportunity and then explore from there. Right? Because sometimes your client wants to do it in a specific way, and you might think, oh, you know what, this is not the best way. At least now they have a sense of experience of that. It is not about being passive to your client. You are helping them change through your warmth, because change is often painful. So now let's go into the next section, which is genuineness. Be yourself. Nobody relates well to a phony. A phony is just a fancy word for a fake person. Some people sense when you are not being authentic. And I think that you are, all of us are to a certain extent, right? So have you ever met someone and you're like, I don't trust you at all? Right. Well, that's because you're able to sense that. And your clients can sometimes sense that as well when you say things where, like, I believe in you, but do you really, right? That's something that I personally always ask when I hear people say, or offer nice things. It's like, are you really like that? Or what's going on? Is there something that you want from me, right? Which makes it very transactional, which again is okay as well, but every party should probably be aware of it. So, here are some examples of not being genuine, which is however you slang that sounds a little forced, which basically means like, when you say it or when you hear someone say it, it sounds a little, cringy, right? I'm sure that if you heard me talk about looks maxing and stuff like that, I think that I can do pretty well, right? But maybe, I don't know. You all sometimes laugh when I do those words, or like, your classmates said cooked. We talked about, bet and stuff like that. For some people, it does sound really uncomfortable and fake. I don't know how I feel about that with myself. I don't know if y'all feel that I am comfortable saying those things and it sounds real, right? Are genuine. Do you do it with the clients to make them feel like they're familiar with their culture or you're familiar with their culture? Do you put on a phony dialect or use a profanity to seem down to earth? So a phony dialect, basically, talking kind of a little bit like them. You might even call it code switching, right? Which can sound phony or fake as well. And code switching is basically you're changing the way that you talk, or sometimes present yourself because of the environment, right? We hear a lot of times people talk about code switching on the phone. So they might talk in a certain way, and then once they're on their phone, they're like, hello there, how are you doing? Are you having a great day, right? So it doesn't necessarily sound as authentic, right? However, there are customers who feel more comfortable having that kind of generic American voice or whatever it is. All right, do you use your words that you do not know what it means? Oh, that's so embarrassing, right? I always try to use words that I know. If not, just look them up and learn them. Do you dress up like someone you are not, and do you not correct them when they make an assumption? So in the textbook, they talk a lot about this person who dresses up in a lab coat, and so people assume that she's a doctor. Although she wants to be a doctor, she's not there yet, right? So what is that all about? And then you look pretentious and foolish and most likely untrustworthy. So once the people might find out that you're not who you say you are, they're going to go, oh, well, why did you make yourself look that way, right? And then that becomes potentially an issue. When it comes to genuineness, we hope that you're open and truthful. Strive to be yourself. Present your authentic self to other people. Overall, I feel like I do. I think that if you know me, like, in class or when we talk one-on-one, that I don't really change that much. Obviously, there's a level of professionalism that is expected, right? So I'm not necessarily going to cuss in front of you all or say certain things that come into my mind that I might say with my friends and stuff like that. But I'm not going to say it here because I'm trying to be professional. It doesn't mean that it's not me, right? I'm like, you know what? This is not a conversation that is appropriate for this situation. And that is it. All right. If you lose a client's forms, tell the person that and then apologize. So what that is saying is just be honest, right? Why do you have to lie about everything or whatever? There's some people who are like, no, just say like, you weren't able to make it because of, blah, blah, blah or whatever. You're like, no, if you're late, you're late. Just say, I'm sorry that I'm late. That's how I believe in it, and I think this is what genuineness is all about as well. I think I skipped the one before it, which is that if you do not know something, say so. And that's really true. Like, if I don't know a word, I might ask for the definition of it, or I'll just look it up, or I might say, I don't know what that term means. Sometimes when we make these assumptions without any clarification, we might be misunderstanding or using the word wrong, right? If someone asks you about your credentials, factually tell them the person what they are. So if someone asks what your educational background is, I would just say, I went to NYU, I went to Cal State LA, I went to University of Texas, right? And those are very matter of fact because those are true, and you can check on those if you want to. The problem with social media to this day is that there are people who lie about these things, and it is a little bit harder to check on those things depending on what state you are in. So now let's get into empathy. I think empathy is the one where we all say that we are empathetic, but we don't necessarily actually demonstrate it. So I would say that sometimes we think we're empathetic when we're really not. But it is something that you have opportunity to right now practice, to do. It's a little bit harder, I would say, than the previous two, because you have to make an effort into this one. Because it's involving other people as well. All right, the most basic definition when it comes to empathy is being able to put yourself into the other person's shoes, right? But there's more than that. Susan Gare, who's a psychologist, says that it's a quest to be able to hear, feel, understand, and value the stories of others and to convey that felt empathy and understanding back to the client. Feeling with the client rather than for the client's sympathy. Okay, so it says feeling with the client rather than for the client, right? So you're being part of their journey. You're going on the same journey. You're not going, oh, I'm so sorry that that happened to you, because that's the sense of sympathy, right? You're saying that this person's suffering, and stuff like that when it comes to the sympathy part. Empathy is not sympathy. Okay. So, but sometimes people feel like they mix those two things together. So let's go further and explore the definition of this. So empathy does not mean that you're so sad for people that you take it home with you. Okay? You feel sorry for people and think that they're helpless and maybe even hopeless. Sympathy is a feeling that we have for others in pain. Okay? So again, we're trying to define the differences between the two. Empathy is a clinical strategy for supporting people through difficult times. Okay, so supporting them. You're with them, not at them. Okay, in the textbook, we also hear about Elliot et al., which is like their team in the psychotherapist, where they define empathy is an active, ongoing effort to stay attuned on a moment-to-moment basis with the client's communications and unfolding experience. Primary task is to understand experiences rather than words. Okay, so you want to explain and understand the experience of it. So you're talking about engagement, making a connection, and then common humanity with other people, right? We're hoping that that's part of this humanity component. The capacity to feel what the client feels, to grasp the significance and the impact that the client is experiencing. So do you get the point of how they're feeling at this moment? You need to be able to comprehend, which is basically to understand the other person's point of view. See clearly what the person needs and feelings are. So, when we have the class discussions and, we go, hey, do you think that you can feel how they're feeling at this moment? We're asking whether or not you can be empathetic, right? And again, it goes further because it's asking you to also process it. And then we're asking you, can you state it so that we understand that you understand this? The third ear is sometimes what people say when it comes to empathy. We hear more than what the client is telling us. So you can sort of say that you're reading between the lines. We hear the underlying emotions, desires, and worries of that client. We see the body language and the tone of voice when it comes to it as well. And with practice, we start to develop a special sensitivity to this. And it's very, very true, which is why I always encourage you all to start practicing all these skill sets that you've been learning about and you have learned about, so that it becomes much more familiar with you, so that you don't necessarily feel uncomfortable. And sometimes going out and socializing and stuff like that, you will be able to connect with other people and then have this empathetic experience with another person. What do you do when you have an empathetic understanding of a client's experience? So we're asking, how does that feel, right? To accurately communicate to the person an understanding of their emotions and their experience. So basically, what that means is you're able to, when you hear someone talk and share about their experiences, and typically it's a tough or challenging experience, they'll be able to understand that you understand the emotions as part of that experience. Okay, so here's an example. Leela was talking to her new case manager about the loss of her mother. Leela, the only child of a single mother, was 15 years old and home alone the night her mother died in the final stages of leukemia. Visiting nurses in hospice had all been in the home earlier, and hospice came again when Leela called them. However, at the moment her mother died, Leela was alone with her and felt lost and helplessness as her mother slipped away from her. Her case manager listened intently, so intently, like purposefully, right? And with interest. She leaned towards Leela, her facial expression registering real concern. So we're talking about that warmth feeling, right, for this young girl. And her words were, "Leela, that must have been so hard for you." And Leela felt heard and understood. She nodded and began to cry. So here, it's about how you say it, right? And we said this before. I've asked you to practice, communicating outside, amongst, the people that you talk to. See if you can become a better communicator and listener. So again, depending on how you say it, it may feel very different, which is why we're hoping that you find a way to say it in a genuine way. All right. Warmington has a definition. Here is the display of emotions such as kindness or compassion revealed in tone of voice or facial expression is likely to form a stronger bond than the recitation of lines learned in communication classes alone. So again, we provide you with these scripts, these things that we want you to say, but you need to rework it into your own language. Okay, so again, and then also obviously you're going to say those things to children, to adults, and stuff like that, and see how it all goes. All right, now let's move on to kind of like combinations of all of these things that we've been talking about so far. Empathy and safety. Empathy creates a safe space for clients to express genuine emotions. When one is understood, the client feels safe enough to explore their problems and their issues. So there's a reason why you want to be empathetic, right? Is to then also convey a sense of safety, so that when you're working together, that things are going to be said and not held back or swallowed or whatever it is, and hidden from the therapeutic relationship. There's also empathy and compassion. When we are empathetically engaged with our client who may feel distressed, we come to feel compassion for the person and a desire to help in some way to help their experience. Okay, so when we truly see things the way that our client sees things, understand their point of view and feels their emotions, a desire to help that person naturally follows. Right, so there's a little bit of convincing here, right? But overall, it is, again, for the benefit of your client when it comes to being able to understand all of this stuff that we just talked about. All right, now let's talk about empathy and boundaries. So we're revisiting Carl Rogers again, person-centered therapist. These are 3 things that he said in his own writing. Okay, empathy is the therapist's sensitive ability to understand the client's thoughts, feelings, and struggles from the client's point of view. So again, this sounds like it needs practice, right? And it is true to be able to listen to the people and understand their thoughts and feelings and struggles, and be able to also communicate that back to them in a way that shows that you understand. It means entering the private perceptual world of the other and being sensitive moment to moment to the changing felt meanings that flow in this person or this other person, this client. Empathy is an active, ongoing effort to stay attuned, which basically means to kind of stay on the same wavelength, to stay the same, time period, at the moment, on a moment-to-moment basis with the client's communication and unfolding experience. And look, we don't know where this person's going to go after therapy or during therapy, so we're going to try to be aware of what's going on. All right. Rogers worried that helpers could lose boundaries between themselves and the client. So it's kind of like overworking yourself and bringing your work home could potentially be damaging. That's what he's saying. A case manager is fully attuned to the feelings and perspective of the other person as if these were their own. However, they do not make it their own, right? So that's the difference. We take, some people take their work home, kind of become it and everything like that, and might not necessarily be the healthiest thing. All right, self-awareness allows for us to disentangle our own feelings from the feelings of others. So it helps us separate, When we do not have a strong sense of self, we may experience the emotions and issues of the other as if they were our own, and we might begin to project our ideas, our motivations, and our prejudices onto this other person as if they belong to them. So again, right here, what we're talking about is if you lose the ability to form these boundaries, you might end up being more involved than you need to be. Okay. You communicate in a way that is not threatening or judgmental. Carefully communicate in this case that you have misunderstood something and readily accept correction by the client. Okay, so remember, when you clarify things, they might go, oh, actually, this is what I was trying to mean instead, right? So it really does depend on the situation, the people that you're going to talk to, and stuff like that. All right, on being judgmental, there are some helping professionals who judge their clients. They apply their own standards to people who have lower levels of education, have lower incomes, or are sick. Some people have survived through trauma and do not know about alternative ways to approach their lives. Some people say that they want to be helpful, but they are distrustful of their clients. So that's, other things about getting to know yourself, right? And this is what we're talking about here is, are you able to, let's say, be helpful and also trust the person as opposed to distrust that person? Some people have survived through trauma, so then we want to talk about the fact that they have gone through things that other people may not have. They have those true lived experiences, right? And we want to make sure that they're able to then put it into how they want to live. All right, judgmental workers measure people by rigid or irrelevant standards. So basically that means is, what are the essence, what is really important when you boil things down, right? Are they measuring it by those things, or are they measuring it by other things just so that, they can measure you by certain things and compare you, even though those things don't really matter? Typically, what the worker assumes about certain people or how the worker feels about other people. Okay, so again, they make these assumptions. They assume, right? And so we want to make sure that they know it. So if they are, then they don't need to assume. Distrust, assumptions about people, feelings critical of people with problems, condemning people for their behaviors or choices, and disparaging the way that people live creates a battle instead of a partnership. So here, if there is no trust, right? If you're just making assumptions about everyone without finding the actual answers to this, feeling critical of people with their problems. So you're, again, making decisions about how, or judging basically how a person is, and condemning people with their behaviors for their choices. So that means, like, if you disagree with how they live their lives and you say that, right? Then it's not necessarily going to be helpful. It's not going to be a partnership. It's going to be much more of a battle, fighting amongst each other, or a disagreement there. And we know that no one's really going to win because they're both going to be trying to win, and it's really a compromise and understanding of the people. All right, let's talk a little bit about a reality check. We're trained to work with people who seem dissatisfied and upset. So this is the reality. You're going to start working with people who can be very challenging, right? Not everyone's going to be like, oh yes, everything you're saying is correct and all that stuff. No. You're coming into this field where people are upset, annoyed, frustrated, scared, all of those things. We expect to meet people who do not see things our way, who are challenging, and who questions our decisions. Like, they're going to go, why would you say that? Or why would you want to do that? Okay. Many of our clients will have an inaccurate perception of reality. And that's very true. So the way that they were raised, the way that they experienced life, has taught them how to see in a specific way so that they can survive. Okay, not necessarily always healthy survival, right? But they're surviving. And so sometimes they will have an inaccurate perception of reality. Okay, some will not be able to express what worries them. Some of let me say that again. Sorry. Some will not be able to express what worries them, so they might not necessarily have the vocabulary, the words, to tell you what they're really feeling at that moment. Some seem unreasonably sensitive. So people are like, no, they're over anxious or they're over hyper focused on certain things, and part of that is because, again, their survival skills, right? Like, their worries are actually what helps them, stay alive. Let's say, right? That paranoia or that obsessiveness of it. Some look confused about following a plan, so people might not understand why they're doing the things that they're doing. And so that means that we're expecting you, as the helper, as the professional, to be able to explain and break those things down. Just because people do not behave exactly the way we would like them is not an excuse to provide poor service, right? So just because you know that they're going to not necessarily follow and go along with everything that you say doesn't mean that you should give up on them. And I hope that you don't, right? We are here because we have studied this, right? We have studied how to become, let's say, a little bit more healthier and successful than where other people might be, right? And we want to make sure that you're able to communicate all of those things. All right, how are clients discouraged? So set up a competition comparing clients to other people. Push, force, or shame the client into moving towards some goal. So here, instead of letting them self-determine, which is one of the words that we saw at the beginning of this chapter, instead we're forcing them to do certain things, shaming them. So basically, like, embarrassing them, right? Until they actually start doing it, which is not necessarily a good way to do it. Focusing too much on the person's mistakes, telling a client to try harder. Obviously, sometimes, you want to encourage them to say, try it, do it, everything like that. But just saying, you need to just try harder, it's not necessarily going to be helpful. Insist that the clients do things your way, demanding unrealistic outcomes, treating clients like they know nothing, who need help for everything. So again, these are things that would discourage a client, right? Failing to notice positive changes in your clients, ignoring accomplishments in your clients, only give negative feedback. Okay, so again, so you can see here, we're focusing on really like the failures, right? And that's not necessarily the best way to make a person want to be better for themselves, right? In the textbook, there are two really interesting stories. One focused on Kitty and the other one on Mario. So please read that in the textbook. Okay, a further look at boundaries, barriers to good outcomes. There is a risk in seeing ourselves and our clients. Some have different situations, but remind us of ourselves. So although they have their life, sometimes you can connect and relate to them, right? When clients remind you of yourself and you are unable to separate them from you, you may become an obstacle in the person that you are helping. So what that is saying is sometimes you connect so much to them that you actually are not helping them anymore. You're just being part of their life, right? So again, we want to make sure that you're able to disconnect from your clients in a specific way that would allow you to go home and, live your own life as well. Some seek work in agencies that deal with similar problems just to continue to heal, which means that the client will be treated in the light of our own issues rather than with the client. So this one kind of comes back to an earlier thing as well, which is to know yourself, right? And I'm sure I've told you this before, which is that some of y'all in my class or in any of these counseling classes or psychology classes, you're actually here to help yourself, heal yourself, right? And that is great. But we want to make sure that you have resolved some of those problems before you go and work in the field. And the reason why is we want to make sure that you've already dealt with your situation, right? It is kind of challenging if you're trying to help someone solve their problems while you're trying to solve your problems at the same time as well. You probably will learn things about yourself while you're helping other people, and that's not what we're talking about right here, though. Where we're talking is that you don't want to sacrifice and make this therapeutic relationship a dual thing where you're helping to solve your own problems while the other person is solving their problems. No. By this time, you should have a pretty good grasp of your life and then be able to just focus on your clients. Okay, the client reminds you of. Read the case example of woman working for a rape crisis center, and then also Yolanda as an addictions counselor in the textbook. When clients remind us of ourselves, we may push people to do things that we did to successfully resolve our own similar problems. And then our own life and circumstances are superimposed onto the client's life and circumstances, blurring the distinction between the two. So these two slides, the previous one and this one, I don't know why the textbook does this, is that it kind of is alluding to these two terms, transference and countertransference, which we'll actually cover in a couple of slides from now. So with this one, what this says is the client reminds you of you, right? And so when the client reminds of us ourselves, we push people to do things that we did successfully resolve on our own similar problems. So what that means is you're now we're putting your own value system onto your clients right there. Okay. Our life and circumstances are superimposed, which is basically put into your client's life and circumstances, blurring the distinction between the two. All right, the client reflects on you. You might become extremely involved in a client's problems and solutions because it makes you feel important or competent, which means, smart or, prepared, if the client are able to solve their problems. Okay, so you might try really hard because you want to kind of benefit from this, which is people, let's say, acknowledging that you're really good or whatever it is, right? That's not the real purpose of why you're here in the helping field. You're supposed to be helping other people. It might impress others that your clients are doing well, so you force them to use your own solutions. So here's something that I will tell you. I had a student who was an intern, and they were working with someone who really had very limited life experience because of how they were raised. It was very sheltered, right? And so what happened was the student felt really impatient with the client. So they just said, this is what you need to do. Step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, step 5, step 6 and 7, and then you're done, right? Because he said, I don't have time to wait around for this person. But what happens is right there, you're just giving them a solution, but you might not even know if this solution is going to work, right? It was convenient for you, so you're just going to do it, for other people without really putting into consideration the diversity, the competency and stuff that comes along with these techniques. Okay, so it might impress others that your clients are doing so well, and which is why you're forcing them to use your solutions. We're focusing inappropriately on ourselves and not on our client needs. Okay. False attributions. There is a very human tendency to make these two extremely unfortunate assumptions about people. Number 1, people who look like me will think and act like me. And number 2, people who do not look like me are not like me at all, but are very different. Neither assumptions is necessarily true, right? Not necessarily true, which means that some could, but others could not, right? So again, we want to remind you, it's not an all or nothing. It's only this way or that way, and that's it. No, there's going to be a combination. So we also want to make sure that you understand is that you don't just give people specific characteristics in your head because they look a little bit more like you or look very different than you, right? We want to make sure that we're not seeing culture or a person in their entirety of their ethnicity, and that is it. False power, our own need to display authority, competence, and power. We may intimidate our clients. We may stop collaborating and give orders instead. So you can sort of see as, you're telling them what to do. Because remember, as a therapist, as a counselor, as a helping person, you have quite a bit of power. You might be able to sign off on their medication or, treatment plans or whatever it is, right? So just be aware that there is a power dynamic here. Okay? All right. Okay, now let's talk about transference. Sometimes when working with other people, you'll find that you remind one of your clients of someone in their past. Sometimes a client is dimly aware of that. So dimly is like low lighting, right? To dim the lights, right? So that means it's kind of a little bit hard to see because it's so dark. So sometimes a client is not aware of the fact that you remind them of someone that they know in their lives. There is just something that they like or do not like about you. Okay. And so we'll see. In this illustration on the slide, you can see a picture of a daughter and a mom, and then that daughter growing up as an adult, which is the middle. And to the right of her is her therapist, who may remind her of her mother when she was a child, right? So if her mom was very controlling and strict and all that stuff, she might also treat the therapist the same way as well, right? That would be the transference because she associates you with her mother in one way or another. All right, transference, feelings and attitudes the client holds about you because you vaguely remind the client of someone in the client's life or in their past. There's positive transference, which is when the client likes you. Negative transference is when the client does not like you. This is one reason that it is important that you do not take the feelings of your clients personally. So right here is a key thing here, which is do not take things that they say about you when working together personally. Okay, they're testing things out, so they might say the wrong things. They might say things that are offensive, but it's not. And I hope that you think about the context or the situation, right, the environment, and go, okay, this person is just trying to learn, and they might mess up. Okay. It can start out with positive transference and then become negative too. So it can be ups and downs, basically. They want to be friends, and then you say you cannot, so now their attitude changes and they don't like you as much, right? Or whatever, or they're sad. So again, you can sort of see right there is it goes up and down. Okay, now we're going to talk about countertransference. So let me read this because it's actually quite long when it comes to the definition here. When the case manager projects onto the client certain emotions and attitudes because the client reminds the case manager of someone from the case manager's past, or the situation is something the client identifies with. So that's a lot of words for basically kind of saying the opposite of what transference was. So remember, transference is when the client sees the therapist as someone in their lives. Countertransference is when the therapist sees their client like someone in their own life. Okay, so it's the other way around. Caseworkers may give special favors, which are considered positive, like we saw before with the negative and positive. If you do give them special favors, it's a positive to someone, or demand something from another, it might be a negative, right? This is a good warning that we have old issues that we need to resolve. So that basically is saying is, typically you should not be having to solve problems, but you might have problems at home, right? So it might not necessarily be the best thing to ignore those things. Deal with it so that it doesn't happen, right? All right, now a really great question to ask is who owns the problem? So again, this is talking about attitudes and boundaries in this chapter, right? So the client owns the problem. Okay, you as a therapist or the counselor do not. As a caseworker, you do not. It's all about the client's ownership of this. Here's an example. Your client comes in and tells you that she cannot stand living with her mother anymore. Her mother is verbally abusive and rejecting. Your client is unhappy. So now let's talk about the client's mother. Her method of communicating with her daughter seems to work for her. She shows no discomfort or guilt about any pain she might have caused her daughter. It seems to meet some needs for her to communicate this way. So as you can see here, if the situation is between the client and their mother, the mother is like totally happy the way that she's treating her, right? The client. But the client is the one who's like, oh, I don't want to do this. I want to live outside on my own. I want to major in this, all this stuff. Then it's going to be changes in the situation. So, but if your client is that daughter, then that means that she's the one who has to figure this all out. All right, who owns the problem? So here's some just like step-by-step stuff. Number one, you want to first is listen. Two, do not provide a solution, but be a resource to your client, right? Again, so you offer them the solution, you could potentially develop a codependent relationship where you're just telling them what to do. They're not thinking, so the next time that they get into a problem, they're not going to be able to figure it out. They're going to have to go, I need to talk to you again, and that becomes an unethical issue. They should be able to work these problems out on their own eventually. Obviously, sometimes it's hard, and we can start to work on it again, but typically, those things can be resolved. All right. 3, give her options. Tell her about the services that you know that might be helpful to her. Okay, so now we're talking about giving you places where things can be helpful. 4, ask for her ideas. What is she looking for? What does she want to happen? So these are kind of like those miracle questions where, if your life is great, what would it look like? So that we understand, so that we can help facilitate that. And then 5, leave the final decisions up to her or the client, basically, because it's going to empower them to decide that they want to act collaboratively with you in achieving these goals. You are all an expert in available services. She is the expert on her own life. All right, that's the end of this chapter. Bye.